All right, good morning. So, second to last day on this piece, we're going from rehearsal 19 and stopping at rehearsal 23. I know this looks like a lot, but I promise you it's not going to be as bad as it looks. It's very repetitive and it quotes previous sections as well as Vivaldi, so I think you're going to be just fine. I have come to the realization that I made kind of a dumb mistake. I was looking for the tempo for the Allegro section for yesterday's video, and I listened to the recording. They did that section faster than the beginning, but I think in the arrangement it's implied that all Allegro tempos should be the same as the beginning, which was quarter note equals 120. So we overachieved a little bit yesterday. So we're just going to calm it down and we're going to say from now on, all of the Allegro sections, including yesterday's, are actually going to be quarter note equals 120. Sorry about that. Okay, so go ahead and check the description box for your timestamp and we'll get started. Okay, first violins. So starting at 19, we have heard this theme before, but there are a couple of extra beats where before there were rests, so it may sound a little lopsided and you'll have to be really careful with your counting. The bowing is a little challenging. I may not have done it the same way, but it does work out, so just you may have to, dedicate a few more brain cells than normal to the bowing here. There are some bow lifts written in, so do observe those. In measure 114, you've got an F double sharp, which is the same as G natural, so you would just play open there. On measures 112, and then where that same thing comes back in 116, where you've got G sharp to A, this would be one instance where I think it would be okay to do a one-to-one, and I know that I never say that, but considering the fact that this piece has intentional slides in it, and it's just a one-time thing and it's going to go by really fast, that would be okay. I may or may not do that. I tend to prefer not to do that even when it's okay, so I will probably go low 1, 2, and then just stretch 3, and then keep going. So whichever way you do it is fine, but this is an instance where I would be okay with a one-to-one. So that takes us to rehearsal 20, and this should look familiar because it's almost exactly the same as rehearsal 2. So the counting here is, and you've got one measure of 3/4 again, rest 2, and then in measure 120 you go back to common time 4/4, resting on 1, playing on 2 and 3, and off. At 121, again, we're not going to worry about the solo. If you would like to practice it because you think you might be in the running to play it, be my guest, but I'm not going to go over it in this video. Be wary of 125, whereas when we had this theme before, it was E natural, now it's E flat, so don't go on autopilot from what you played at rehearsal 2. Then at 127, you've got E flat and then D flat in the next measure. Then at 21, first of all, we're back in 4 flats, B, E, A, D, and we are quoting Vivaldi here. Love it, very cool. Max Richter did that in his, and we're seeing it here again from Piazzolla. Now, those of you who have practiced octaves before, fingered octaves, which means playing your first finger on one string and your fourth finger on the next string, right, like G to G or E to E, you will have no problem with this. If you've never done that, it may be a little more challenging. So the concept of fingered octaves is setting your hand as one shape, not thinking of two individual notes, and then moving it as a unit. So take a look at rehearsal 21. You're starting with A flat. So if I had a third finger tape, it would be right here, and I'm moving up to where low 4, where A flat would be, putting my first finger there. Now look at 130. You've got high A flat alternating to low A flat. So you're going to put your 4 down on the A string, and that's going to be high A flat 1 octave. 4, 1, 4, 1, 4, 1, 4, 1. In measure 131, you're going to move this whole hand as a unit, not in two individual notes. Down a half step, now I'm on G. G for a measure, and then high G to low G. 133, move the whole unit back a half step, now I'm on G flat for a measure, high G flat to low G flat. 135, you're moving from G flat to F, down a half step, F for a measure. This time in 136, it's not an octave, you're just playing C to F, so it'll be 1-to-1 across. Then in 22, rehearsal 22, you can go back to first position. Now, you could go back to first position in 135. Either way is fine, it doesn't matter. You would just be going 2 to 2 instead of 1 to 1. Whatever works for you is fine. Then in 22, we get more of this syncopated eighth notes. So if you want to write in the counting, that might help. Here you're playing 1 and 4 and 3 and, okay, it's one of those things where once you get the hang of it, no big deal, it does repeat. And that basically takes us to measure 144. This is a measure of 5/4, okay? The quarter note, the beat itself does not change. We're just adding an extra beat. So it's 1, 2, 3, and. I'm just going to demonstrate a couple of these things in here. First of all, I'm just going to show you the fingering for 19 that I was talking about. So, like I said, you can do 1 to 1, which would look like this. 1, 1. That F double sharp is just open G. Or you could do half position 1 to 2 in measure 112, which would look like this. 1, 2, etc. Personally, I think the half position feels better, but again, up to you. Now I'm going to play the rhythm here at rehearsal 20 slowly. So I'm going to set my metronome at quarter note equals 80. 1, 2, and 3, and rest. And then finally, I'm going to show you how I would practice this octave section. So starting at rehearsal 21, find A flat. So here's G, first finger in third position on the D string. Up a half step. Okay. Then you're going to find the octave with your fourth finger on the A string. So here's the low one. And I'm going to keep this pattern, this hand shape, all the way through this section. So we have 1, moving my hand down as a unit so that my first finger is one half step lower on G. Here's G. Now I'm at 133, half step lower. First finger is on G flat or F sharp. Now, here you have two options. You can either go one more half step and use your first finger, or you could go back to first position and use 2, etc. Like I said, if you're not used to playing octaves, you may want to practice this just with the finger patterns, and you can even do double stops, although it might be a little painful. So here's A flat. That's generally how you practice octaves. You slur from the bottom to the top and then do a double stop on the up bow. So to make sure they match. And then I'd go down to G, G flat, F, or I guess in this case you could do a fifth to C. Alright, so like I said, I don't think this section is going to give you too much trouble. I'm going to go ahead and set my metronome at quarter note equals 120 and play through. 2, 3, 4. Okay, the rhythm at the end is a little tricky, I'm not gonna lie, so you might want to write in that counting there. Okay, that's it for this section. I'll see you back here tomorrow for the very last part. Okay, second violins. So your part is very, very similar to the firsts here. They're doing more or less the exact same rhythms. So at 19, we have heard this before. I'm not gonna lie, the bowing here is a little unnatural. It does work out though, so just start slow and make sure that you're doing what's written on the page. There are some bow lifts through here. Everything that's written in is good. Let me just point out a couple of fingering things. At 112, so one after rehearsal 19, you've got G sharp to A. Now this is one scenario where I would be okay with you doing a 1-to-1. The reason for that would be, first of all, it's going very fast, and second of all, this is a piece where we have seen a lot of slides that are intentional, so I think that it's within the concept of the piece to hear a little bit of a slide. So stylistically, I'm okay with it. Now, I am not going to do that. I just prefer on principle to do low 1 to second finger in half position and then reach for 3 and continue in first. In measure 114, you've got an F double sharp. This is the same as G natural, so you're just going to play open G to low 1, no big deal. Those 4 measures repeat, and that takes us to rehearsal 20. At rehearsal 20, this should look very familiar. This is almost identical to what you did at rehearsal 2. So the counting is a little funky, but once you get in the rhythm of it, it'll be just fine. I would recommend writing in, 1 and 2 and if that helps you. You do have one measure of 3/4 right here at 20, and then it goes to common time in measure 120. And just be careful of those flats near the end of this 124 to 129. At rehearsal 21, Piazzolla is quoting Vivaldi here, very cool, and you guys can get away with doing this all in first position. Just notice that we did go back into 4 flats, B, E, A, D, which means that in measure 130, so you're playing C natural, you're going to D flat. So that 2, you're going to play a low 3, so it'll be C, 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 D flat, C, D flat, C, D flat, C, D flat, C. Then the next measure, you've got a B natural, next measure C, B natural, B flat in 133, and you're fine. 135, you've got A flat, you need to go into third position and play this with a low 2, because in the next measure you're going to be going from B flat to A flat, and I don't want you going from a low 1 to a low 4 on a different string. So third position for 135 and 136. Then at rehearsal 22, you can stay in third position for this, I probably will, and then I'll just shift back down in 144 to first position. The rhythm here is a little tricky, but the rule of thumb is between each set of 2 notes, there are 2 eighth notes worth of rest. Whether that is notated as individual eighth rests or 1/4 rest, that's the pattern. And that throws off where you're playing the notes within the measure, from measure to measure. But if you just think click, click in between each 2, I'm not going to lie, that's what I'm doing, you'll be fine. The last thing to point out would be there is one measure of 5/4 in measure 144, so the tempo doesn't change, the value of the quarter note doesn't change, we're just adding a quarter note. So you'll rest and 2 and 3, play, 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 and then you're at 23. Dynamics wise, there's kind of a lot going on. At 19, you are fortissimo, lots of accents, very heavy. And then you go down all the way to piano at measure 121 with a decrescendo leading into that. You stay piano through the entire rest of this part until the measure of 5/4 where you're fortissimo again. Okay, that's everything I needed to point out, so I'm going to go ahead and set my metronome at quarter note equals 120 and play through this section. 2, 3, 4. And that's the section. Happy practicing, and I will see you back here tomorrow for the very last part. Okay, violas. So you guys are playing more or less in rhythmic unison as the violin 1 and violin 2s, but different notes. So let's go over a couple of fingering things. Here at 19, in measure 112, you've got a D sharp, so just play that with a high 1. And then the 4-3-4, you're going to want to do G with the fourth finger at the end of that measure. Then in 114, you've got D sharp again, and then also G sharp. Best thing I found to do is just play with a low 1. Unfortunately, then you have to go straight into 4-3-4 after that, but I think that's probably the best way to do it unless you wanted to shift really fast into third. And then those 4 measures repeat again, and that takes us to rehearsal 20. At 20, measure 119, we're not going to worry again about the solo. If you guys want to practice it, be my absolute guest, but we're just not going to go over it here. This should look very familiar to you because it's almost exactly the same as rehearsal 2. So looking at the gli altri part, the bottom part, which means everyone else other than the soloist, you've got one measure of 3-4, and then it goes back to 4-4 common time in measure 120. Also watch the bowing here. There is a couple of up-ups that are easy to miss. Watch your accidentals 123, 4, and 5. You've got some flats here, and that takes us all the way to rehearsal 21. At 21, we go back to 4 flats, B, E, A, D. You rest for one measure. This is a part where Piazzolla is quoting Vivaldi, which is very cool. You guys jump in on 130 with the eighth notes, and these are going to be off the string. Obviously in 132 you're going to want to play those A's with a fourth finger, and the E natural lasts for the entire measure. In 134 you've got a G flat, so you're just going to go low 3 there. In 132, remember we're in 4 flats, so you're going from A flat to D natural, so I would probably just use low 4 to open. That's fine unless you wanted to go into third again and do low 2 to low 3. Then in the next measure you've got a D flat half note, which takes us to 134. Here you're going G flat to D flat. Remember that D is still flat, so I think you could probably get away with either going high 2 to high 3, or you could do low 3 to low 4, whichever one works better for you. Keep in mind if you do high 3, you'll have to bring it down to a regular 3 in 135 for that C. Then in 136, you've got a perfect fifth going from G to C, so try your best to put your third finger on both strings at once. And then at rehearsal 22, we're back to this rhythm, this kind of syncopated rhythm. It's a little tricky here. It's not the same as what you have at rehearsal 20, so be careful. There are essentially 2 eighth rests between each set of notes, so just be really careful and count. Then finally at measure 144, we go into 5-4 for one measure. That doesn't change the tempo, it doesn't change the value of the quarter note or the eighth note. All it does is add a beat. So you'll be resting 1, 2, 3, and that takes us to rehearsal 23. The last thing I'll point out here is the dynamics. At 19, you're starting out fortissimo, lots of accents, very heavy. And then when you get into the solo part at 20, at measure 120 actually, there's a decrescendo all the way down to piano. And then you stay piano for the entire rest of the section until that very last measure of 5-4, where those last 3 notes, you're back to fortissimo. Okay, kind of an interesting section. Just make sure you're counting extremely carefully and watching out for all of those accidentals and those flats once you get to rehearsal 21. I'm going to set my metronome at quarter note equals 120 and play through. 2, 3, 4. so that's this section. Happy practicing, and I will see you back here tomorrow for the very last part. Okay, cellos. So a lot of this section should look familiar to you. At rehearsal 19, we have the quarter notes with the slide, which is very similar to what we had at rehearsal 5. Then at rehearsal 20, we get almost exactly what we had at rehearsal 2. Be mindful of that 3-4 measure right at rehearsal 20. It goes back into common time for 4 in the next measure. And then you've got this off the beat eighth note pattern. Just count super carefully and watch the accidentals. There are a lot of flats thrown in here, and make sure that you're having those accidentals last for the entire measure and reset at the beginning of the next. I know it sounds like a no-brainer and you guys are very talented and you know that, but in a section that's so busy like this with all these flats thrown in, it's really easy to miss one of those. Then at rehearsal 21, we go back into 4 flats, B, E, A, D, and Piazzolla is quoting Vivaldi here, very cool. You guys are jumping in on every other measure, basically, of this theme, so you just have these eighth notes that are going to be, they are going to come off the string a little bit. As usual, I'm really not going to try to give you a fingering for this, especially the octave. I know that's got to be tricky, so whatever works for you is fine. So you're starting out F to F, then you get D to F, D flat to F there at 134, and then one before rehearsal 22, you've got A flat is in the key signature again to F, and then you've just got some whole notes to finish out this section. Keep in mind that an accidental that is included in a tie lasts through the entire tie. So for instance, in 139, you've got D natural. That will last for both measures, even though it's not reiterated at the beginning of the next measure. Last thing I will say is you've got one measure of 5-4 going into rehearsal 23. This doesn't change the tempo, it doesn't change the value of the quarter note or the eighth note, it just adds a beat to the measure. So you'll be resting 1, 2, slide, and then you're at 23. Dynamics wise, here at 19 you are fortissimo, where you had that chromatic run right before 19, set that up. You're fortissimo all the way to 121, where you drop down to piano, stay piano all the way through that 5-4 measure, and then those last 3 notes are fortissimo again. So very black and white as far as the dynamics here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and set my metronome at quarter note equals 120 and play through. 2, 3, 4. One thing I noticed while I was playing this was at measure 25, 125 and 126, you've got F flat notated, so that is the same as E natural. So you're going from B flat to what is essentially E natural, and that F flat lasts for the entirety of those 2 measures, and then you get an E flat at the end of measure 126, so just be careful about that. Okay, happy practicing, and I'll see you back here tomorrow for the last part. Okay, basses. So a lot of this should look familiar. We have seen it before. Starting here at 19, you've got that quarter note pattern with the slides up to C and D. At measure 20, it's back to what we had at rehearsal 2, I believe. You have one measure of 3-4, and you're divided inside-outside for the top and bottom staff. Then it goes back into 4-4 right there, one after rehearsal 20. The top part has that little chromatic 16th note run, so whatever fingering chromatically works for you is fine with me. Then you're in unison. Oh, and the bottom part has been pizzicato since rehearsal 20. At 122, we're in unison, both playing the same part, and now both parts are pizzicato, and that lasts through all the way to pickups to 23. Now, this part here at rehearsal 21, where we go back into 4 flats, is a solo, so I'm not going to go over it here. If you want to practice it, be my guest. Obviously, we won't know who will be playing it because we'll be combined with the other orchestra. If you would like to audition for it, totally be my guest. It's a very difficult part. It is pizzicato still, but you'll see right before rehearsal 21 where it has the number 1 and the dot, that just means one person, and then Steffi has also written 1 only. So if you do practice it, just make sure that you're using a fingering that is the most efficient possible and that you're placing the accents where they are notated. Then at rehearsal 22, everybody is back in, still pizzicato, and that takes you all the way to 144. 144, you've got one measure of 5/4. That doesn't change the value of the quarter note. It doesn't change the tempo. So you're just going to be resting 1, 2, play, and so you're just going to be resting 1, 2, and then play 3, 4, 5, and that takes you to rehearsal 23. Okay, I'm going to set my metronome at quarter note equals 120 and play through this. 2, 3, 4. And then here's the top part at rehearsal 20, 2, 3. And here's the bottom part at rehearsal 20, 2, 3. And then we're back together here at measure 122, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then the solo part happens, and then here's 22, 2, 3, 4. Just be careful at 22, those are E flats because of the key signature. Same thing at measure 144. Okay, happy practicing, and I'll see you back here tomorrow for the last part.